campaigning for justice for child Q and racist policing in schools, campaigning against racist attacks and supporting victims of racist attacks and supporting their families in the case of racist murders. From racism in the health service, like we saw with COVID during the pandemic. It was Black communities that were disproportionately impacted, and that's a product of institutional racism. So all aspects of institutional racism, from healthcare to education to policing to that took place just weeks after several Reform UK MPs had actually made history back then by being the first far-right MPs in Parliament. And we saw the consequences of that was racist riots on the ground, because as we know, racism at the top leads to racism on the ground. So all of these different areas of work, from mobilizing against fascist street movements to racist riots to supporting victims of racist attacks and their families and all those justice campaigns to campaigning against institutional racism. You think it's bad now, and it is, but it is going to be a hell of a lot worse if we see a Reform UK Tory coalition government, which looks like it would be Nigel Farage in number 10 and them leading that coalition government. So this would be more right-wing than anything we have seen in British electoral history. So this is hugely significant. This is a new era. So we have got to plan, mobilize and organize against this. And this is just the beginning. This is just the start. Some of you may be feeling a bit despondent, because I know a lot of us were campaigning up and down the country, mobilizing the Vote Against Reform UK. And you might be feeling despondent because of the result. But I think we did a good job, because the first thing you have to do is correctly identify the problem and at least start an organization against it and talk about how actually this is really serious and we need to be doing something about it. We've been saying this for almost a year now, and suddenly, people are now, saying what we've been saying. So we've made the right start. We've correctly identified the problem and we've begun to organize. And I've outlined why I think it's important that we continue to do that and we build on that. Now, I'm going to move on now to how we stop Reform UK. And I'm going to begin by saying how not to stop Reform UK. And how not to stop Reform UK is to do what the Labour government has done in the last week in response to it. So we have seen the announcement of an immigration white paper. We have seen an announcement about restricting an odd proposal to restrict visas from people in Pakistan, Nigeria, and other places, because they tend to overstay their visas and then claim asylum. I mean, I'm not even convinced that's even happening, because I'd like to see the figures. I've not seen any figures that show how many people overstay their visas and then claim asylum. And certainly the people that do come here claiming asylum, the majority of those are granted asylum status here in Britain. So that's not going to work. Proposals like that. And there's another proposal about English language, people having to take some sort of test before they gain British citizenship on how fluent they are in speaking English. Well, actually, of the immigrants that actually come here from outside of Europe, so the immigrants that come here from the Middle East, from Asia, from Africa, actually, English language is their main first language. It's the European immigrants that actually have the European languages as their first language. So of those that actually migrate to Britain, actually English is their most commonly spoken language, and they are actually fluent in it. So a lot of these proposals are just sort of red herrings. They're just distractions, and they're not actually going to solve the problem. Why aren't they going to solve the problem? Because one, it is conceding to a racist agenda that's led by Reform UK, and that's wrong, right? And secondly, it's not actually going to deliver any votes for Labour. So electorally, that's not actually going to defeat Reform UK, because all the stats show that Labour needs to appeal to Green voters, Liberal Democrat voters, and generally progressive voters who are actually put off by such immigration proposals, right? So it's not going to mobilise their voters. So it's a really it's a really bad tactical mistake, as well as being politically wrong, because obviously we all believe you should challenge racism, not concede to racism. So that's not going to work. So it's really important that we urge the Labour government to switch course on immigration and to actually adopt a more human rights based discourse on the issue of immigration, to implement safe passage for refugees crossing the Channel, and to implement justice for Windrush, because, you know, it was such a huge scandal. And, you know, thankfully Diane Abbott led a massive heroic campaign to get justice for Windrush, which at the time brought down the Home Secretary Amber Rudd. So that was a huge victory. But it's important that we do actually fight for justice for those people. So we should be telling the Labour government to actually implement policies like that on immigration. And the other reason why it's important to urge Labour to switch course from this race to the bottom on immigration and trying to out-racist the racist is because amongst Labour voters who are not going to vote Labour, who have, switched from Labour from the 2024 general election, well, immigration doesn't even make it in the top 5 issues as to why they are switching away from Labour and not voting for them. Those voters are concerned about cuts to the winter fuel allowance, cuts to PIP, other cuts to benefits, not investing in public services, not standing up to the rich and powerful. So it's policies like that, progressive policies that Labour isn't doing, that is turning people away from Labour. So if we're talking about mobilising a vote against Reform UK, Labour needs to take a more progressive approach on the question of immigration and the issue of cost of living crisis, because that's another big issue. The fact that cost of living hasn't changed since Labour's been in power, and people can see that. So it's really important that we urge the Labour government to switch course. But in terms of what we do as a movement, so we've got to urge the Labour government to take a more progressive stance on the question of immigration and to challenge and not concede to racism. But also we've got to get organised, we've got to mobilise, we've got to mobilise the broadest alliance against Reform UK, because at the same time as having disagreements with Labour, we do need to be working with Labour Party MPs up and down the country and other political parties, and we've got to bring together a broad alliance against Reform UK that is capable of defeating it at the ballot box. We've got to do that, as well as actually campaigning for Labour to adopt a more progressive stance, because in reality, unless Labour do adopt a more progressive stance on the cost of living crisis and on the immigration question and other issues, if they don't start taking a more progressive approach, it will be difficult to defeat Reform UK in the far right, because people will be needing a decent alternative to vote for. So there's a few things we've got to do. We've got to unite a broad alliance against Reform UK at a national level and on the ground locally. That's a huge task for all of us, but I think that's what we've got to do. Secondly, we've got to challenge and not concede to racism, and we've got to campaign, we've got to lobby our MPs to tell them Labour needs to switch course on immigration. And we've got to get mobilising on the ground, because as we speak, there are several demonstrations up and down the country targeting hotels that are housing asylum seekers. And I think this sort of thing is going to increase. I think there is a good chance that we could see what we saw in the summer with those horrific pogromist attacks on mosques, on asylum seekers, on Black communities and other immigrant communities. I think we're likely to see a repeat of that sort of thing. So we've got to get ready to mobilise and organise, because because we know when the far right grows, all other aspects of racism worsen. So we've got a big job to do. So I want to thank you all for joining us here today. I'm sorry you have to put up with the B list in conversation while we're waiting for Gary Younge to arrive. So thank you all very much for your patience. Thank you for coming here today.
Look, I'll apologise. I was supposed to be speaking for 2 minutes. They've given me extra time. Really big mistake, right? I want to start off by, I'm going to talk about some things that have been concerning me this week, right? And some of the work that we've been doing with Stand Up to Racism. The first thing I want to say about the impact of reform coming in, you see that in the way that it affects our lives. I'll give one example, the police. This week, the police produced a report that said the riots that happened in August came from nowhere. Nobody organized them, yeah? No one called a specific place to attack every immigration office in this country. No one put out a specific time to go there. No one produced placards. No one produced flags. It was as if a miracle had happened. All these people were planned to do had come from nowhere. Now, as my job is to question the police. Firstly I said, have you got an intelligence organization? You know, like MI5, Special Branch, people sitting in offices, drinking coffee and donuts, reading reports, following people who are right-wing terrorists. Have you got this? Yeah, yes, we have. So I said, who's this individual? He's an individual. He used to be in the BNP. Oh, so because he used to be in the BNP, he's no longer a fascist or a Nazi. Oh yeah, but he helped to organize a demonstration down in Bournemouth, didn't he? Yes, he did, but you can't automatically say if somebody's done that, they're connected to an organization. I said, please remind me to tell you this during the Palestine demonstrations, right? that this is your official line, because I'll be very happy that you've said this so I can repeat it to people and say, this is your line. And the reason why I say that is because we call them the Farage riots. And we're quite right to call them Farage riots. Farage is a very dangerous man because what he does, he hints at something. He doesn't take the full responsibility for it. You see, the fascists used to come out and say, we're fascist. We want an all-white Britain. We want David Beckham not to be playing for England. And the more they spoke, the more happier you were, right? Because they were slowly cutting themselves off from large chunks of people. The difference with Farage is a populist racist. He attempts to appeal to large numbers of people and pull politics to the right. And for us, the reason why this is important to us is the first thing that they try to do is change the narrative. They try to tell us that we're the minority. Now, I honestly, look, I'm not going to be disparaging towards reform people, but I am. Have you had a picture of the reform organizers? Have a look at them, right? I'll be careful what I say. I was a teacher and I always used to say you have to be positive about people, but it's the Addams family, right? These are the weirdos that would sit in the pub and not get a real hearing, right? But they've all organized themselves into an organization. They've got millionaires that are backing them and they're able to project their voice or their views over everybody else. Plus they're turbocharged by what's happening in the United States. They've got Trump on their side, pushing their ideas and attempting to normalize them. And that's one of our battles. One of our battles are, we had to fight very much to make sure that racism was not normalized. The other thing, did you realize about the election, is that you notice after the election, do you remember who did they put out as their spokesperson for the election? Have you noticed it? That they put out their one black Muslim speaker as their spokesperson for reform. You know why they did that? Because they were on the defensive over the question of being labeled a racist organization. They didn't want to be labeled a racist organization. And what does that tell us? That tells us that we've won certain battles that have not gone right back. And I'll be honest about this. When I grew up in East London, and I grew up not far from here, when you walk down to Liverpool Street, my friends would say, have you been to Liverpool Street and have you been to Hoxton? And if I said yes, they'd say, you're a liar, right? You didn't go anywhere near there, yeah? You ain't going there because you couldn't. You could go there in a group, but you couldn't go there on your own because it was a genuine no-go area, because the National Front had a base there and they would attack you on sight. Now, the truth is, no matter what Nigel Farage says, we have won a situation where you can. The streets do not belong to them. The streets belong to us. We have won that right. And when they said, what stopped the riots? You stopped the riots. You, the people in this room and other people, took leadership and won the space to say that we're not prepared to go back. We're not prepared to have trans people attacked on the street because they say that they don't belong. That you're not prepared. And by the way, it was a close run thing. You know, I have to say this now, Gary's come here, so sadly, you don't have to listen to me anymore, right? Because the real team is going to come onto the platform. But I do want to leave you with that. I do want to say the question of what happens with Farage is about leadership. It's not inevitable that Farage will get into a position of that. He will stand in the election. He will build a big machine. But the question about which way it goes depends upon the fight that we rage. And I say this about the media. I've never seen someone treated with such soft gloves. Hello, Nigel. How you doing, Nigel? That was a tough question, right? He doesn't get any questions. He put out I don't know if people saw this, he put out his economic report last week, right? The Economist was the only paper that carried it and said it's a disaster. It would blow up Britain. And I'm not saying you support the capitalists about keeping their money, but what I am saying is, why can't any people from Newsnight, from the BBC, from ITV ask him questions that he can't answer? Why do you think we can do without the NHS? How would your insurance scheme work? How many people are you going to kill if you do this? Why can't he get basic questions? I'll be honest, I stood once in an election, right? And the first thing they said to me was, isn't this a nonsense that you're standing? Right? No, you know, not, hi, Mr. Bennett, thank you for being the... I'm very, very hostile to what you're saying. And I don't mind that. But I would like some of the hostility. It's almost as if what he's saying is right. He's not challenged at all by the media. And that's the reason why we are going to challenge reform everywhere they are. We're going to be outside every councillor and have a demonstration if they're there. Because what happens is they are forced to report. When you resist them, they're forced to report it. So our job at the moment is to mobilize that majority of those people and expose reform. But I'm going to hand over to Samira, the real leader of the Stand Up to Racism, and to the real speakers, which is Diane, which I really want to thank. And I want to also obviously thank Gary and thank the audience very much for putting up with me as the warm-up guy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to Sabi and Wayman. They've done themselves a disservice, but the co-conveners of Stand Up to Racism. But I think we've called this event today because I'm sure we're all feeling the shockwave that we've witnessed in British politics that happened at the local elections, where Reform UK, a far-right racist party, have had another electoral breakthrough in the form of almost 700 councillors, several mayoralties, the Runcorn by-election, and now taking control of 10 councils across Britain. And I think that this event has been called not just as an ordinary political rally, but really to discuss how we've got here and debate the way forward and what we do next. And I think we've got two people who are no better to speak on this topic. Two of the four foremost outspoken voices, I think, in Britain on the questions of race and racism. Two people who have, been mentioned a lot, but also afford a proper introduction, and that is Diane Abbott and Gary Younge. So, we'll have a round of applause now. of the anti-racist movement in Britain in a lot of ways. Someone who, no matter what has been thrown at her, has always stood up on the right side of history and against racism, and also the president of Silence to Racism and a great friend of Silence to Racism. And Diane is also joined here with me today by Gary Younge, who is one of the most renowned journalists and authors on race, the former editor-in-large at The Guardian. Really, we're here with two experts today, and I'm really honored to be sat next to them. I guess I don't know if I introduced myself. My name's Samira. I'm one of the national organisers at Stand Up to Racism. But I'll be asking Diane and Gary some questions, and then I'm going to give the audience also some chances to ask them some questions. And I just wanted to start the conversation a bit from Stand Up to Racism, I guess. We've heard from Wayman and Sabi, but I think there's a lot to be proud of from our end of things, of how we were able to mobilise people up and down the country for a campaign against Reform UK in places like Runcorn, in the northeast, in Nottinghamshire, in Doncaster, really proving that you can bring an anti-racist message into these areas and get people around us. But obviously, we know that the threats and the dangers are very great, and that there's a lot more to do. But the first thing that I wanted to ask both of you was, I guess, just your initial thoughts about the local elections and really what it represents in politics, and how much of a shift do you think it represents in the British political landscape for Reform to have that much of a breakthrough. And Diane, would you want to start us off, or you can decide amongst yourselves?
No, I think I'll take that. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, my name's Diane Abbott, Member of Parliament for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, just round the corner, really. I would just like to say, for a few words, that we have to put this in an international context. We're seeing in France and in Germany the rise of far-right parties, unprecedented numbers of MPs from far-right parties. In Italy, the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, her party is, it's literally a neo-fascist party. Literally a neo-fascist party. And I was a little bit alarmed, but I think one of the first foreign trips that Keir Starmer did was to go and see her. I'll come back to Keir Starmer in a bit. But no, it's all happening in international context. And of course, what's happening in the United States. Because Trump is blatantly racist. They are threatening to take money away from universities if they are doing too much about DI, what they call DI, anti-racism. They are trying to stop, and are successful in stopping, some big companies not to spend money on DI, otherwise they're going to lose government funding. So you've got the rise of the far right politically in Western Europe. You've got the rise of the right in America. There's always been a right in America, but not as blatant as Trump is. And he's actually threatening people in terms of funding, in terms of support, and so on. And that is the context in which we're seeing the far right in this country. And my concern is partly, they've got 5 members of parliament, just unprecedented for a far right party. But I'm concerned they'll get more members of parliament. But I'm even more concerned that they will drag the political debate in this country further to the right. I am concerned that my party, looking at the fact that Reform has got these MPs now, looking at the votes they're getting, will think the way to contest Reform is to copy Reform, that we have to be neo-Reform. And I think that is a political dead end. It is a political drain. It is the wrong way to go. And one of the reasons why it's important for what Stand Up to Racism is doing, what all of us in our different ways are doing, is we have to fight back against the tendency in the Labour Party which thinks the answer to reform is to echo reform. Thank you.
Yeah, Gary, did you want to have some thoughts after that?
Well, I guess on top of what Diane said, particularly about the international context, because it is it's very important to understand it in that realm, is that, and I hope we get onto it, there is also a crisis. I don't know. Oh, it's not working now, is it? Try that. Hello. Is that there is a crisis of hope. These people are bottom feeders on cynicism and despair. And that cynicism and despair comes in no small part because last July we had an election. There was a landslide on very thin calories, if you think of the kind of low turnout and the dispersal of the vote. And it wouldn't even be right to say that there's been no change. In some way, there's been an acceleration of austerity. And so people are thinking, well, what am I going to do? Now, lots of people stay home, and the people that don't stay home, some of them think, well, I will give this a chance. So that there is, I think that a lot of this and a lot of the councillors that were interviewed afterwards said, look, it was the disability cuts, it was the 2-child cap, it was freezing out pensioners. It was a range of things that I don't think anybody who voted Labour, and these votes were, it seems, not necessarily as likely, but fairly likely to come from Labour as to come from the Conservatives, were people who just kind of, well, we didn't want this. And and it's a little bit like, I think, during the Brexit vote, where having not made the case for immigration for years, they were suddenly faced with this moment where the talk about immigration was actually going to impinge something that they wanted, which is stay in the European Union, and it was too late. And that nobody is making the case. Nobody's making the case for immigration. Nobody's saying, you know what, it's not immigrants that are putting a strain on the National Health Service, it's immigrants that are saving the National Health Service and have been doing it since 1948. They're not saying that, like, look, small boats, people coming in small boats, they're coming from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran. 2 countries that we bombed and 1 country whose democracy that we've undermined. They are here to kind of, distort a bit of civility because we were there. That there is a connection between our foreign policy, including the supporting of the genocide in the Middle East, and who has to come here and why they have to come here. And so this is not kind of joined up thinking that, when you expand the money for the military and you cut aid, what do you think that's going to do to people who are, who are desperate and coming to this country? And what kind of country are you trying to defend if the pensioners are freezing and the kids are hungry? What is that military for? So there is this kind of this refusal, really, to engage them on the terrain that they've chosen, and rather than do that, to pander and to talk about numbers and where from and all, in a way that is not going to solve anything for a large number of the people who have voted for reform. So I feel that there is a crisis in credibility for our political class, and that is what they are feeding on. They haven't got answers to anything, but they are feeding on despair, on bigotry, and on a kind of a desperation for something to change. 5-year-olds in Britain are a full 1 centimetre shorter now than 5-year-olds were in 2010. That's austerity. Like our kids are smaller. It's horrible. And you know, that is the kind of world that will produce fascism. And this is what these people are. And the last thing I would say is that we've had this weird 2 weeks where last week we commemorated the defeat of Nazis. And a week before, a large section of this country voted for their ideological descendants to go into parliament. And it shouldn't be for the small number of left-wing Labour MPs or the small number of Green MPs or a handful of kind of left-wing journalists to be pointing that out. That, you know, if electoral politics has any meaning, then that point of view should and could be represented. And I think this country is better than this. But we're not being shown any kind of leadership. When they say we talk, you know, we're making the tough decisions. It's not a tough decision to cut a disabled person's benefits. It's not tough. It's not tough to punch down. And that's all they're doing. You want to be tough, go tell Donald Trump to take a hike. You know, you want to be tough, go and tell Israel, stop bombing and starving and so on. We're gonna stop selling arms to you. If you want to be tough, make the rich pay more for tax. If that's what you want, if you want to be tough, because our enemies, they don't come in small boats. They come in limousines and first class travel. They extend our hours, they cut our pay, they take their bonuses and they piss off.
Yeah. Well, I do want to hear more, I guess, from both of you about the direction of the government and how that relates to the rise of reform. But I just wanted to come back to, I guess, how you were putting reform in the context of the rise of the international far right. But also, I think, you know, the rise of the far right here in Britain more generally, because again and again, we've seen attempts by the far right to break through in Britain that thankfully have been driven back, whether that's the BNP, whether that's the EDL, whether that's UKIP and so on. And I guess a question would be, how do you think the breakthrough of reform or the rise of reform is different from those past attempts? But also if there's lessons that we can take from those previous attempts, or how we've stopped those previous attempts for how we're fighting reform today.
I think that they have made, I don't like to use the word progress, but they are moving forward in a way we've not seen before. And I think that it's partly to do, as I say, that internationally there's a context in which they, you know, that gives them a certain amount of justification in their heads. But I also think the rise of online has made it a lot easier for people to connect, to put out their racist ideas. I think the rise of online has made far-right politics just that much easier to organise in a way it didn't used to be. I think in terms of contesting reform, I think it's very important what's going to be happening at a grassroots level, whether it's putting pressure on your local MPs and local councillors, whether it's working with the broader community. If you step out here onto Bethnal Green Road, you can see very many people, thousands of people actually, from the Asian community, the African community, the Caribbean community, and yet very few of them are in here. And what we really do have to do is make that link with communities, because they are angry, they are frightened, but elements of the left aren't really connecting with them. And if we are going to successfully get reform to back off, if we are successfully going to that Labour Party leadership to understand that they cannot be echoing reform, we have to work with the broader community. That is what will make us a strong campaign.
I think what's different now compared to say the rise of the BNP compared to the rise of the BNP. Can you hear me? Hello?
No, I think it's working.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me now? Hello? Is austerity. I think that we've had 15 years. The last big rise of the BNP was like 2000, 2010. We've had this incredible rise in austerity, which has hammered individuals and communities. We've now had that passed not just through 1,000,001 leaders in the Tory party, but now being taken on by the Labour Party. And that reform is different to the BNP insofar as they come, first of all, through the Brexit campaign where they were successful, and secondly, by actually allying with a significant section of the Tory party. And by, and it won't feel like this, but you have to look back and think about what the BNP was saying with a slightly more sophisticated version of the racism. It's not racist to talk about immigration, that kind of thing. And frankly, with a more robust neoliberal agenda, which is then being kind of has the tailwind of what is going on in the rest of the world. What was interesting, I was on holiday when it all blew up last summer, but what was interesting to me was at the beginning, from afar, thinking, where are we? All these people coming out and they're, threatening asylum seekers and they're attacking mosques and so on. And then when we showed up, they disappeared. Like, we're bigger than them. We're better than them. We're better organized than them. They took us by surprise, I think. I don't know because I wasn't here. But that they can be stopped. They're not unbeatable. They're certainly not smart. But they won't be, we can't rely on the police to stop them. This is a political problem. It's not a criminal problem. They are criminals. But the problem is essentially political. And so we have to treat it as political, and we have to organize politically, and we have to fight them where they are. If they're in the streets, we fight them in the streets. If they're in Parliament, we fight them in Parliament. If they're on telly, we fight them on telly. Wherever they are, we have to fight them. And that there can be no sense of like, well, yeah, fair enough, you've got a point. We are fighting them. We are fighting for our lives. And we can see that from what is going on in the States. We can see what they would do if they could. In the States, literally snatching people off the street who've committed no crime and deporting people who are innocent and then saying, too bad, you can't come back. Deciding that what the courts say actually doesn't matter because I'm the big boss. So this is not some kind of, difference of opinion kind of thing. We do have a difference of opinion, but their opinion is that we don't have humanity and we are not deserving of the rights of humanity. At that point, it's an existential threat. And so, we have to organize, and we organize where we are. We organize in our communities, in our unions, in our churches and synagogues and mosques and so on. And we're focused on what we're doing. We may have differences of opinion about other things, but this needs to be a broad-based campaign. It cannot really indulge in the narcissism of relatively small differences. We are up against fascists. They will not say they are fascists. I'm minded always of Michael Rosen's poem. He says, fascists don't turn up in fancy dress. They don't turn up saying, hey, we're going to set up some lagers and they offer you honor. They're going to clean your street. They're going to make things whole again. And so we have to fight them, both in the streets if necessary, but also rhetorically. We have to fight them, and we have to be wherever they are. And wherever they are, we have to call them out. And, you know, I really do hope that the Labour Party, because it's the party in government, and I don't hold too many illusions. Probably you hold even less, but the Labour Party wise up to actually what this threat is. That you can't deport enough people to satisfy these people. That's not what that's about. You know, this is not about immigration reform, actually. It's not about people in small boats. You see how they move from the enemy of the month club, and one moment it's asylum seekers hostels, and the next moment it's small boats, and it will be something else, and the next moment it will be the Roma. And we have real, and it's not the Roma that traded in bond credit swaps, and as a result, we ended up with our libraries being closed and our schools, you know, teachers being fired and all that kind of stuff. You can't blame Syrian refugees for that, but that is exactly what they're doing. I don't think the alternative argument and the alternative the organization is hard, but the argument is not. But it's not being made at the level that we need it to be made. And it will only be made if we insist that it be made. That Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. And so we are going to have to make demands. We're going to have to make demands around actually the welfare cuts, around housing, around all the things. An awful lot of people, not all of them, but an awful lot of people who vote for reform care about the same kind of things that I care about. Housing, welfare, education, and so on. And it's not working for them. It's not working for anybody. Difference between me and them is that I'm not blaming immigrants for that, or asylum seekers, or Muslims. I'm blaming the government and I'm blaming the rich.
Well, I think you've both spoken about, I guess, how the discussion on immigration is being dragged so far to the right, and how this government is now also, trying in some places to out-reform or to pander to reform, the kind of discussions about deportations and so on. Obviously, both said that that's not the way to undercut the far right. It only fuels their growth. But I think these local elections have shown as well a kind of fracturing in mainstream politics, where, for the biggest times in recent history, you saw votes going outside of the kind of traditional Tory and Labour to reform, or to reform mostly, but also elsewhere. And I think, reform is now posing themselves as the opposition, replacing the Tories. They are reshaping the right in Britain, but obviously also we've discussed the role of the government in kind of creating some of the terrain in which the far right and reform is able to build. So I was wondering if maybe, Diane, because you've been so outspoken on this, within Parliament as well, about actually what you think the government should be doing, and where the failures are taking us.
I think. Hello? Yeah. Right. I think one of the issues around racism is the extent to which it's being gradually normalized. Issues that once upon a time people were, making the argument, going on the demonstration, going to the rally. That's one thing, but it's the normalization of racism, which is really alarming. And it's the extent to which people at a grassroots are not being able to encourage, to strengthen, to support it, to take the case against racism. And the danger is that as we normalize racism, we don't go forward and we don't unite. We don't unite. I think one of the things at this time is it's worse, as you say, because of what's the media, the elements of the Labour leadership, But it's the normalization, and it's as if, well, you know, certainly inside politics, formal politics, there's almost like, well, you know, it's not very good, but we have to, you know, we have to stop normalizing it. And we have to remember, as Gary is saying, that the threat, it's not just someone getting up in a meeting and saying something that you disagree with. It's a real physical threat to us in here in this meeting, but to other people, other communities, other issues. And it's so important that we stop normalizing it, that we come together, as between people of color and other ethnic groups. It's not, you know, fighting reform isn't just about, well, they're over there. Fighting reform is knowing that the elements of the fight against the reform is amongst us. It's amongst us, and it's being legitimized. And if we just let things stand still or even go backwards, it's a very fearful, it's a very dark time. So as I say, we have to organize with each other. We have to organize, as I say, with the greater communities out there. Because sometimes there's almost like on the one hand, there's the activists. On the other hand, you've got Africans, Caribbean, Bangladeshis involved in their communities and their campaigns. And there's a danger that those two things are a little bit slightly not together. What we have to do is to pull together the politics, the community, and go forward. Because the danger is that if we splinter, if we are not reaching out to each other, we are necessarily weakened. So yeah, I think it's so important that we come together, that the people out in the street on Bethel Lagoon Road are actually coming out and campaigning and working with the people in this room. I think that is an important thing if we're going to move forward against reform.
Yeah, so, well, I was just going to say, off the back of some of what you were saying, Diane, about the normalization of racism, because I think obviously we've seen great resistance in recent years, namely Black Lives Matter. We've seen all the rights that we've hard fought for, and won, around racism. But I think now we're witnessing, one of the most concerted attempts to roll us back on every single thing that we've won, whether that's, Trump in the US, the attacks on DEI, which obviously we're seeing from reform here, like the reform mayor coming out saying that we're going to scrap every DEI stuff that doesn't even exist in the Lincolnshire Council. This kind of scapegoating of things that aren't there, this kind of Trumpism. But I think that, well, obviously, two people that have spoken very powerfully about, growing up Black in Britain. But how far backwards do you think we've gone?
See, I don't think of it as being as linear as that. That there's a range of ways in which we've gone forward, right? And one of the ways that you can tell that is that nowadays no one will admit to being a racist. We have racism, but no racists. It's amazing. It's like magic. And I feel that it's really important, because we're not going to be able to dispense. There's a great African proverb: be careful when a naked man offers you his shirt, right? Because if he had a shirt, he would wear it, right? So we can't offer hope if we don't have hope. And we should have hope. And our hope should be in the fact that we have been here before, not exactly in this place, but in this kind of place, 58, after the pogroms in 58. For example, in the 70s with the NF, in Southall, in Brixton, in a range of places, and we've rose up. And 2020 is an important moment because it shows the potential, and not just our own potential, but the potential of the country in a certain moment. But it also tells us that these things ebb and flow. And so they're coming for us right now. And we're on the back foot right now, I would say. But you can cut down the flowers, but you cannot stop the spring. That we are moving forward. We have to move forward. And we have to move forward with a sense of hope that this country is better than this and that we can be better than this. And the thing that we lack, the thing that I think 2020 showed us about more than anything, was that we can get our capacity to get huge numbers of people out on the street is not contested, right? And we've done it before and we can do it again. Our ability to keep them there, to organize them, to incubate that energy and then take it forward, that we have a problem with. We have proven the capacity to clear space, political space. We have not proven the capacity to build on that space. And that is what we really have to work at, I think, is our organizational capacity, our ability to kind of sustain it, knowing that once we've defeated these gits, and we will, because we don't have any choice, there will be more gits, right? And so we can't be caught napping. We have to keep going. And that, that takes an orientation, really. It takes an understanding of racism as not being something that Farage invented, but something that he is the product of, and that has a long-standing tradition in this country, as does anti-racism. And so, we have met before. Farage is a version of the Mosleys and the Powells and the so on, and there'll be more after him, and there'll be more like me and you after them. And if you look at it historically, we have prevailed historically. We are in a better place now than we were in the 50s. We have won a lot of things. And of course, power concedes nothing. So they're always trying to take it back. They're trying to take back the rhetoric. They're trying to have conversations that they could never have had 20 years ago. They feel, when they say you can't even say such and such nowadays, it's like, well, first of all, you just said it. So obviously you can. But secondly, nobody's stopping you saying it. It's just that then nobody's stopping me calling you a racist if you say it. Like, you can have freedom of speech, but you cannot be free from the responsibilities of your speech, which is what they don't like. Yeah. I do have a question for Diane, though, which is it's not a hostile question, but it's about the Labour left. Because we know there is a Labour left. There was, Corbyn happened. It happened for a reason, and some people are still in it. But I'm genuinely interested. Is there a plan? Are you guys meeting? Is there some coordination or strategy to engage this moment on the left in Labour, both in Parliament and outside?
Yes, I mean, in Parliament, MPs who are on the left meet every week. And one of the things we're really focused on is how we challenge and how we move forward in the current in the Labour Party that thinks the way to beat reform is to sound more like reform. Because obviously, that's where we are. We're in the party, but no, the Labour Party is meeting, but and we are organising. But what is striking about Farage is Farage gets endless publicity. You don't hear from the left. We're not given that sort of time and space in the media, not at all. It's Farage and reform. And even, to be fair, the Greens, the left organisations, they don't get that time and space. So yes, we are meeting, we are organising. The fact that you don't see us on Newsnight doesn't mean to say we're not meeting.
I don't watch Newsnight, but I'm glad to hear it. I mean, I just think that it comes back to the hope thing. I want to say is that I was in the States just for a few days in January, and a friend of mine who's not particularly involved was kind of saying, you know, what should I do? And I said, I can't tell you what to do. I can tell you that doing nothing is a problem. But I feel that there are large numbers of people in the country who see what we see. But they're either doom scrolling or they're just avoiding the news. If I don't watch it, maybe it hasn't happened. Or they're bitching about it with their friends. And they are waiting and hoping that somebody else takes it up. And that somehow we have to get across a sense of urgency in this moment. That, in the words of June Jordan, an African-American feminist, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And now is the time. That wait too long and it will be too late. You know, which is how some people feel in America right now. Well, I don't know, you know, I don't know if I can do that because I don't know how bad the consequences will be. Well, we're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. And so now would be the time. And I do think that sense of urgency is not quite, I think we have to do more to convey that like individuals may resist, but resistance is collective. Yeah. So you need to join something. Stand up to racism would be a good example, but like you know, it could be something that you organize in your church or your synagogue or your mosque or your union or whatever. But like, do something, and now would be the time.
Yeah. No, I think that is a good hopeful note because I think we have to recognize how urgent the threat is and can do more to convey that, but then also remember that the vast majority of people in this country did not vote reform. The vast majority of people in this country are the people who took to the streets against the riots. The vast majority of people are anti-racist, but it's a question of getting those people organized collectively. And thanks for doing a plug for us. Please do get involved with Stand Up to Racism. But I want to take this moment now to throw it out to the audience to see if people had questions for Diane and Gary. We've got, do you need one of these? We'll come around with a mic. I'm going to go first to the lady who's just sat in the aisle here with the sunnies on.
Right. Thank you both for, and all of you for putting on this, this event. What I wanted to find out from the panel, and really to get to the point, racism is really about what they are doing internationally, but even deeper than that, what's happening in Africa. Because without racism, they wouldn't legitimize their approach to countries that want to correct themselves or to redevelop, like Burkina Faso, and leaders who want to work for their people and show up Europe and America for not looking after their people. What they've sort of done with racism is put Black people and melanated people in a position where they're between a rock and a hard place. They can't literally follow through on what the racists say, go home, you insert expletive back to your own country, because our countries are not allowed to develop and to sort themselves out. So internationally, with France having that pact where these countries are paying colonial taxes to this side so that they can siphon off repeatedly the resources of Africa. Racism is really about what's happening in Africa and what's not being allowed to happen. Our development, our choice, our sovereignty, our agency. So what do you think in terms of that? What's the way forward?
I'm going to take a few questions, and then we'll come to the speakers. There's just a person right at the back on the left. If people want to raise their hands again.
Thank you very much. Just trying to find a word. One thing that annoys me is that Farage has, and the likes of him have taken two things from us. One, he's taken pragmatism and turned it into the sort of racist thing to do. And two, he's also, and Musk has a part in this, he sort of brought, let's say, the certain geeks, on a lot of them onto his side. And so how do you get those people back from him? Third, he's, and actually as someone who appreciates both of these countries, he's also taken sorry, I'm autistic. I'm just trying to find the best way to describe this. I know that actually the far right have actually cited places like Japan, and we've got people, and we've got the far right in Italy. How do you support people in those countries through what we do here without tarring everyone in those countries with the same brush?
Thank you so much for your question. We'll take two more, I think, if that's all right. Just the person right at the back stood, yeah, and then the man.
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you.
My name is Liz. I am actually a usurper this meeting. I live 45 minutes down the road from here in one of the safest conservative seats in the country, and also in a constituency where 3 years ago or 4, about 10 years ago, the first 3 BNP candidates were actually elected in the area that I live in. 2 or 3 years ago, I was asked to stand as a local councillor in an election. Because of my very anglicized name, I'm proud to say I came second in the election. And I think if my name had been anything else, I wouldn't have won that. I wouldn't have come anywhere near there. But on a more serious note, I am a member of the local Stand Up to Racism platform in my area. And I have to say, if you called a meeting, it wouldn't be as diverse as this. And I'm saying this because this idea, Gary, that people are not outwardly racist, I don't think where I come from or where I live, it happens. And it has happened to me. Yes, it's a battle, and I'm constantly fighting that battle. I've had to call the police to the area, in my area, about three times in the last, I've lived there for 30 years, by the way, and I've had to call the police in about 3 times. And it's not just people, it's the local council, it's institutional, the organizations that represent us. It's embedded in those organizations. I see it, I feel it. Yes. Anyway, I have to say, on a serious note, when you talk about the problem being internationalized, I think people say that, we've entered a crisis, that there's a breakdown of the old order. I think it's a bit of a crisis, but the real weakest links are outside Europe. We tend to talk, when we talk about, the crisis or international, we think about Europe, about America, but I think the weakest links are elsewhere, in Africa, in Asia, in South America. That's where the opportunities are. That's where change will come from. That's where some of these issues that we're grappling with, the answer lies somewhere else. It lies here to some extent, but it is somewhere else. The bigger questions are somewhere else.
Thank you. The man here, glasses, yeah, waving. Thanks.
I mean, thanks a lot to Gary and to Diane and to Stand Up to Racism for organizing this. And what strikes me is the very, very serious nature of the situation in which we're in. And I thought that your response, both of all your responses, in terms of absolutely organizing resistance to respect wherever they raise their head, is is extremely important. And hats off, to be honest, to all those counter demonstrators who came out last August to defend the mosques, to defend the libraries, and to defend the communities from which they came. And I think that Stand Up to Racism played an absolutely enabling role to make sure that happens. But I think that also we have to grapple with the fact. So there's no doubt we need, in my opinion, to build a shield against the racist and against reform. But I also think we need a sword. We need a sword because the biggest recruiting sergeant, in my view, is actually Keir Starmer for reform. And every promise he breaks, there's another 100,000 votes going to reform, whether it's the winter fuel allowance, whether it's the WASPy women, whatever. And I just think that what I mean by building a shield, yesterday in Birmingham, there was a multiracial demonstration in support of the 8-week-long bin workers' strike, which pulled people together and offered people a way of attacking the government that is wrecking their living standards. So I think the shield and the sword is extremely important. And I won't raise the other point here now, but in building that sword, I also think, Diane, I don't want to upset you, I do think the Labour Party is now finished. It is a spent force. And I think we have to get our heads around the idea of building a radical alternative that embraces Palestine, that embraces trans rights, and embraces a real fight against the cost of living, because we can win it. Gary, you're completely right. We can win, but we need to be bloody, bold, and resolute.
Okay. On that note,
I'm going to let you deal with the Labour Party's finish of the parcel. First of all, I didn't say that there was no outward displays of racism. I said even those people who were attacking the mosques and so on last year wouldn't have admitted that they were racist. That the actual admission that there's plenty of outward displays of racism, that's clear. But to claim to be a racist, and in this sense, Farage is different to the BNP, right? That the BNP were proud to say that they were a racist party, whereas Farage is trying to do something else, and the Tory party is trying to do something else. So, yeah, that was my point there, and I think connecting the point that you made and the person. The first person made, we have to fight this wherever it rears its head. Yes, it's in, that there are manifestations of racism in Africa, and long have been. We know this at least because of slavery and colonialism, but even after independence, as you rightly pointed out, we have neo-colonialism. The answers are wherever we are. And that we can't offshore this and say, well, actually, it's really an American problem, or racism is not some kind of artisanal product that is produced. It expresses itself in each place in its own way, and we fight it where we find it. And I'm from here, so I'm going to fight it here. It doesn't mean that I don't recognize it somewhere else, and it doesn't mean that I won't be involved in solidarity actions with other things, including Palestine, which, by the way, is also an incredibly racist, violent, murderous kind of moment, and one that I think it's important for us, not as a litmus test necessarily, but rhetorically to kind of connect the dots there, not least in the way that the people who would stake their lives on fighting anti-Semitism, and quite right, because anti-Semitism is a really important issue, even if the way that they talked about it was often deeply flawed. These people who cared so much about anti-Semitism, where are they now? Where are they now in this moment? Because actually, an awful lot of the disparaging of Corbyn and the smearing of Corbyn actually contributed in a large range of ways to this moment. And if you look at what Trump is saying about why he's doing this to universities, he says it's to defend Jewish students. He's using the same playbook that was used against Corbyn. And so we have to be vigilant, of course. And it's not that doesn't mean that anti-Semitism either doesn't exist or isn't important or shouldn't be fought. There is no anti-racist movement if you're not also going to fight anti-Semitism, but it can't be leveraged against the poor and the weak and the dark and the asylum seeker and so on. That's exactly what they're doing. Also, with relationship to Africa, the one group of people who Trump said he would welcome into the country, Afrikaners. Afrikaners. We talk a lot about the black diaspora, but what we're seeing here is a real leveraging of the white diaspora and a defense of a certain kind of whiteness. So when they say make America great again, now they started saying make Europe great again, you ask them like, well, when was it great? And you'll see that at the time when they said it was great, we meant nothing to them. Our lives meant nothing to them. And when it was great, they were stealing our resources, they were stealing our people, they were stealing our land, and they were running off. And that's what they want to return to. So race is absolutely fundamentally embedded in this program. And it's a global thing, which means that you can't just fight it in America. You can't just look at it somewhere or in Africa or in Britain. It's everywhere. So we have to have an internationalist understanding as we're doing this, as they did in the 30s with fascism. One of the points that the gentleman over there made, and this will be my last point, is that kind of I don't have an issue with Italians. I don't have an issue with Americans. I don't have an issue with the Romanians who just voted for a far-right leader. I have an issue with fascists and racists. And wherever they are, I'll fight them. And wherever there are people who will fight them, I will join them, whether they're Romanian or Italian or whoever. This has always been a global struggle because racism was a global product that came out of a global economic system that was slavery. The nature of the racism has changed, but the fact of it being a global thing in which kind of, you could be, after the war, African-American soldiers would still have to go around the back while the Nazi prisoners of war could still go in through the front door. Yeah, they were Nazis. Yeah, we defeated them. Yeah, you helped fight them. But you know what? At the end of the day, you're still black and the back door is still for you. So this is a global system, a robust global system. The Americans could go to Germany after the Second World War, charged with denazification with a segregated army. Right? Just get your head around that. So it's always been global, and none of this can be won in a single country. None of it came from a single country. None of this increase in the right that Diane said right at the beginning comes from a single country. So we can't do it on our own. It's going to have to take solidarity. And the issue, as I say, is not with the Italians, it's with the racists, wherever they are.
we're coming to an end. Well, first of all, how long? Oh, okay. Well, the first thing I wanted to say was that one of the important things we have to, I think, engage with in fighting racism in a context of class. One of the alarming things about reform is partly that they're racist, and partly that they're winning seats, but also they are wiping out political organizations in parts of the country where, when I was first in politics, they were the bedrock of the left. I'm not saying the bedrock of the Labour Party even, I'm saying the bedrock of the left. When you have Durham, which was the heart of the miners' strike years ago, when you have Durham, and I think every single councillor in Durham now is reform. And what is that? Anyone that can remember what Durham meant in the 80s, what the industrial and coal mining. And so fighting racism is absolutely vital, but we also have to put it in a context of class. And I think one of the reasons why the Labour Party is moving to the right on these issues is also moving away from a class analysis. That's part of the problem. So I think we have to organize, we have to come together. So you have people from different communities coming together, not just sort of very fractionalized campaigning. We have to come together, we have to organize, and we have to recognize that if we don't put this in a class context, we're necessarily weaker. And in some ways we're better, but in the sense that the Labour Party has moved, how can I put it, moved more centrist, we're weaker. You know, once upon a time you could rely on the organised trade union movement and unions like the mine workers or the factory workers. I can't quite remember, but I was reading about it recently. One of the biggest demonstrations in the 80s was a demonstration, and it was called Grunwick. And Grunwick was a huge campaign which went on for months of working class Asian women fighting for equality. They were fighting for equality. And some of us, we came down, we picketed, we marched, we supported them. Now we're not quite where we were. That assumption that we come together, male, female, Asian, Caribbean, African, that assumption that we come together, both in terms of class terms, but also in terms of our different different communities, we've kind of slightly, I think, moved away from that. So I think it's about class. I think it's about bringing different communities together. And I think it's trying to work with each other, support each other, and have a level of unity that we need. So some things are better, as me and Gary sitting on this platform. We wouldn't be sitting on this platform in this position, I don't know, 30 years ago. In some ways we're better, but in other ways we've moved away from the kind of class analysis, which in the end is the most effective way to fight racism.
Yes. Oh, God. Thank you. I think we're going to have a couple more questions from the audience, if that's okay. Yeah, so I'll go to the woman right at the front and then person in the middle.
Thank you very much to Gary and Diane for this very inspiring and albeit a little bit depressing conversation. I lived in the 80s. I was in France as a student, and I kept thinking back as you were discussing this, the experience of the anti-racist movement in France and here, and it just feels a little bit like we are catching up with where France was in the 90s at the moment. We have, you know, the anti-racist movement, the organized working class managed to stop this breakthrough for the far right, electoral breakthrough for the far right for, well, many occasions. The anti-racist movement is very much stronger here than I think it was in France. But what the difference was, exactly the concessions that mainstream politics and also laws made to racism, like the hijab ban, like the stigmatization of Muslims in particular and other so-called minorities, and the fact that people didn't have the right to vote. You know, you could have been an immigrant in France without any political power, and so you were not taken into account. I think we have those strengths here, which has meant that those communities, you know, those well, minority here, but majority in the world communities could exert their political power. And I think what we need to really focus on is how do we give expression to that mass majority position that there is for anti-racism in this country? What are the layers of that, and how soon and quickly can we do that? And organization is crucial for that. And I'm thinking, you know, where are people organized? We're not starting from scratch. Obviously, trade unions are vital, and they have to take on the role of, you know, that their machinery to the service of stopping this threat, this existential threat that has been identified. But I mean, I left the Labour Party in October 2023 because of the position on genocide. And I cannot see myself going back to the Labour Party. But I am appalled by what this government is doing. And so, you know, from inside and outside, we need to put pressure on this government to change course. And I'm not, you know, Sabi was talking about that quite convincingly. How are we going to do that? What will make them listen to the majority, and rather than give, you know, sort of give concessions to reform and racism, which is not only wrong politically, but also disastrous politically, and for the Labour, those Labour MPs will not exist. You know, they will not be in those seats if they don't wake up and smell the coffee. And I'm just wondering how we outside, but also inside the Labour Party and other organizations can push the envelope on the Labour government, and quickly. They have to, you know, this normalization is a danger. Once it becomes like, okay, reform are now legitimate because people have voted for them. And we will see more of Farage, not less, because he's got all these councillors and these MPs. So really that expression has to happen very fast, I think. The mass movement has to organize very quickly.
Thank you. So the person in the middle, yeah, you. No, sorry, behind you, Gary. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I just have a quick question. It's, how do you see the fight against climate change and for climate justice as like sitting within this broader, sorry, a bit awkward to speak, sorry, sitting within this broader issue, and how obviously that's like a long-term existential threat that if we don't address all the other issues that we're facing are going to only be heated up by climate change and its ramifications globally, etc. So how do you see those two things sitting together, or how can, and especially the stuff you talked about, Diane, in terms of solidarity and finding community and stuff, how do you see the movement for climate justice as potentially like working within that especially where sometimes in the UK, the spaces for talking about climate change can be very white and middle class, and people don't see those, the interplay between all these issues. And maybe the Green Party at times certainly seems to struggle with that and can't position themselves as addressing that. So yeah, how do you kind of see all those things interplaying, and how can we work effectively to mobilize people, yeah, that sort of question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to go back to our speakers. Who would like to start? Diane?
I think you made a very important point about climate change, because one of the realities of climate change is the people that are suffering most from climate change are in the global south. And yet the people who, the countries and the powerful entities, whether they're business, whether they're countries like the United States, the people that are contributing the most to climate change are those countries with power. The people that are suffering most from climate change, as I say, is the global south. And I think whenever we can, I think it's very important, you made that point, it's very important that we bring the country, the issues together. It's not racism over there and class over there and climate change over there. They're actually one part of the struggle against the empowered in the world. So it's an important point you made. And I think, as I say, I think it's very, very important for the global south. And obviously so many people in this country, they have family or relatives or people they're working with in the global south. So you're right, we need to bring it together. In terms of where from here, as I said just now, it's about bringing together the class struggle, the climate change struggle, and racism. And somebody said, how do you get Labour MPs to pay attention? Well, you know, it's quite interesting. Last week, I was in Westminster last week, and I have to tell you, there's a lot of really panicky Labour MPs. Not because they're that principled on racism, to be honest, right? But they can see that they can see them majorities crumbling away, because they went door to door in Runcorn and also some of these councillors, and they were meeting a hostility that they hadn't expected or seen before. Talking particularly about MPs that came in last year. They are really frightened. And I think, I don't want to sound cynical, but I think we can use that fear. Certainly that's what we're thinking of, those of us that are, you know, trying to organise in Parliament itself. But you can use that fear as a way of getting them to address racism in a way they haven't done up until now, and haven't felt the need to do up until now. But they have to understand, and I think they're gradually understanding, that if they want to get elected the next time, they have to stand up against reform. There is no victory, no success in just echoing reform. They have to challenge racism. They have to challenge what reform stands for. So what am I saying? I'm saying, yes, some of my colleagues are deeply principled and so forth, but I'm also saying that some of my colleagues are quite self-anxious. I mean, not everybody is Jeremy Corbyn, let's put it like that, okay? Not everybody is Jeremy Corbyn, but as I say, it's a lot of really panicky people. And I think that gives us, one of the things, not the only thing, that gives us a way to try and engage with the debate, whether it's locally, you know, whether it's going to meetings that are organised locally, and it's also about nationally. But yeah, I think that it's we're in a dark place. We're in a dark place around racism, but we have to believe that we can move forward. We have to come together. We have to, as I say, bring race, gender, all of these different issues, we need to come together and we need to move forward. Because if we don't, the danger is that we will find ourselves marginalized and we will find reformer going forward. I mean, Gary's right, of course, we've defeated the far left in the past and we can defeat them again. But we have to recognize that some of the things which strengthened us about racism don't necessarily strengthen us today. So we have to come together, we have to organize, we have to support each other, and we have to remember that unless we move forward, unless we take it as part of the forward thrust, unless we move forward and we just think that, you know, you've got, I don't know, nice people like Gary, unless we move forward, there's a danger. And as I say, you look out onto the streets, look out all the people that really should be in this meeting today. We have to understand, we have to unite, we have to move forward. And I do believe that we have won and we can win, but we have to understand and we have to move forward.
Taking the last question first, I think it's very important. I think I saw Farage the day after the local elections. I was doing one of those, like, if I don't watch the telly, maybe they didn't win kind of things. But I think I saw Farage in one of his in Runcorn saying it was DEI, which we don't even call it DEI here. Like it was just a script. Climate change. So it was Black people, the planet, and trans people, I think, were like, you know, his central targets. So they are connecting them. And one of the problems I think that, I say it's a trick we're missing, but one of the problems we have, I think sometimes on the left, is not just sometimes connecting those dots. Look, immigration is partly driven by climate change. Now, I don't want to be in a position of saying if we fix the climate, they won't come here. Because that is a kind of, you know, that is a kind of scurrilous, cowardly way to behave. But it is nonetheless true that if they're not running from our bombs and our economic policies, they are quite often running from the environmental disaster that we have caused. And so these things are connected. And I think that in their taking that script from America, they're on to a bit of a loser, because I don't think that the anxieties that British people have around race and racism and climate are the same. But nonetheless, we have to be clear about the connections of these things. And we have help here that when Diane was talking about the diaspora, that like, you listen to Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, she is very clear about climate change and the impact that climate change will have on small islands like the Caribbean and on poorer places. She connects it to reparations, and she connects it to the broader attacks on the global south. And it is in those places that you see people being the bravest, that she got up and said, because the Americans tried to stop any country that was taking Cuban doctors, something like that. And the Cuban doctors are all over the Caribbean. And she said, if this means that you won't let me into America, so be it. So did the Prime Minister of St. Vincent. These are small places. These are small, poor places that are standing up in a way that Britain or France or Germany just aren't. And so the connection is already made. They are making it quite explicit. And I think we have to be more explicit about why it's important. That also does demand, as you suggested, from the environmentalist movement, that they take on and embed anti-racism within that movement, just as we must embed kind of environmental protection. It's easier for some people to imagine the end of the planet than it is the end of the system that created the end of the planet. That is mad. That is mad. And the potential for us to turn that around is pretty clear, I think. And then just on the broader questions, we are not going to do this on our own. And this is not just an attack on Black people. It's not just an attack on Muslims. It's not just an attack on asylum seekers. It's not just an attack on immigration. In ways that are not just rhetorical, it is clearly an attack on all of us. And we can see this because the playbook that we're working from, we can see it. We can see them attacking the federal workers and firing them. We can see them attacking trans people and removing them from the military or wherever. We can see that, in a sense, the racism and the xenophobia is a Trojan horse for a much broader attack on our democracies. And we cannot let them get away with that. And that means that we are going to have to build alliances, broad alliances, with people who can also see that threat. And we are going to have to frame that threat beyond just issues of race. And that's where the importance of class and of tackling homophobia and of the environment comes in, that we may well end up, as the anti-racist movement, being the spearhead and being the kind of fulcrum point around which all of these other people meet. And we will have to broaden it out from there, because people can see the xenophobia and the racism in a way that they can't necessarily see the other things, because it is, frankly, is clearer and more blatant. But I do want to end with a hopeful note. We can do this. We have done it before. 5 years ago, we mobilized thousands, tens of thousands of people on the streets against anti-racism. They're still there, but we have to mobilize them again. And when we mobilize them this time, we have to mobilize them, and then we have to keep them. We have to find a way to sustain that struggle. That this can't, it all takes place on the phone, and the modern organizing is different, but we have to find a way to incubate and sustain that energy so that we can galvanize it. Farage isn't the first, and he won't be the last. We cannot afford to run up the hill once again and defeat him and then go home. Racism is here for the long haul, and that means we have to be here for the long haul.
Okay, well, thank you so much to our two speakers. I think that brings us to the end of the discussion. But just on, we're really honoured to have had this. It's been such an important discussion. I'm sure everyone got as much out of it as I have. Can we just have another round of applause, please, for Diane and Gary? And just on the note of trying to sustain this movement, sustain organisation against racism, I would urge people here to get involved with Stand Up to Racism. We are bringing the fight to Reform UK up and down the country. When they drive through attacks in these councils, when they demonise migrants, when they embolden the far right to take to our streets, we will be there to stop them, but we need to be much, much bigger. We also need to do more to challenge what this government is doing, the attacks on migrants and so on. I want to announce that we've got a demonstration on Monday where the border bill is in report stage in Parliament, which wants to instead of rolling back, the hostile environment and attacks on migrants' rights, it actually builds on more attacks. We'll be there in Parliament Square on Monday at 5 p.m. to oppose this bill. But yeah, please do get involved and please do stick around. We want the discussion to carry on, but we also have the bar open. So please do grab a drink. We've also got bookmarks here with us who have Diane and Gary's books. So please do grab a copy. This is Gary's most recent, I believe, and this is Diane's autobiography, if you want to read more. But I want to thank everyone again for coming. Please do get involved. Together we are stronger, and together we can stop the far right.